I was the unwanted bride of the Eastern Palace, a wild wind from the desert trapped in a cage of silk. Married to a prince who loved another, my only solace was his lonely son. In the shadows, we shared forbidden secrets and mastered the bow under starlight. But the seasons turned. The boy became the emperor, and I, his stepmother, became his darkest obsession. This is no royal fairy tale. It is the story of a warrior who traded her freedom for a crown, and a forbidden love that burned until the day she chose to die on her own battlefield. Chapter 1. The Crown Prince and the Crown Princess are deeply in love, but I am the Crown Prince's secondary consort. When I married into the Eastern Palace, the Crown Prince and the Crown Princess's legitimate son was already 11. I had only just turned 15. On our wedding night, the Crown Prince sat beside the bed and took the wedding fan from my hand. Yet he didn't perform the ritual of drinking together. He only sighed and set the fan down on the quilt embroidered with peonies. Life in the Eastern Palace isn't like life at home. There will be things you're not used to. If you need anything, food, clothing, whatever, go to the Crown Princess. She's a kind person. Then came a stifling silence. It was as if he were searching for something else to say. At last, as though he could think of nothing and couldn't bear the awkward quiet, he patted his knees and added, "If you don't like eating alone, you can go to the Crown Princess's quarters and dine with us." And with that, he turned and left. He didn't even really look at me. I couldn't help following him out. Beyond the courtyard, I found the Crown Princess waiting. She was truly beautiful. Gentle eyes, a soft, kind face. She reminded me of the Buddha I used to worship before I married. The moment I saw her, I liked her. She smiled faintly and held out her hand to the Crown Prince. He walked up, smiling as he took it. His eyes brimmed with tenderness, the same look my father and mother used to give each other. The Crown Princess noticed me leaning against the doorframe in the distance. She offered me a warm smile and a small nod. Then the two of them left side by side. I slid down against the doorframe. Looking up at the moon, I suddenly missed home. My home wasn't in this bustling capital. My home was far away at Human Pass. There were yellow sands and the vast desert. There were tall poplars and long camel caravans. When the camel bells rang, clink, 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 I'd dash out with pearls my eldest brother had given me, or silk from my fourth brother, and trade with merchants for strange new trinkets from the western regions. Back then, I was wild and free. I can't even describe how happy I was. But 3 years ago, my father died in service, and my mother followed him in death. My fifth brother and I escorted their coffins back and settled in the capital to observe mourning for 3 years. At this year's Lantern Festival banquet, the emperor saw me. He pitied me for losing my parents so young, with no one to care for me, and for being of marriageable age with no one arranging a match. He said that for my father's sake, he would grant me the best marriage. So he bestowed me upon the Crown Prince. My fifth brother said it was because my brothers all held important posts guarding Human Pass. That was why I would never be able to go back. I was born at Human Pass. I grew up at Human Pass. And now I could never return. So on the night I was betrothed to the Crown Prince, I cried the whole night through. Now I wanted to cry again. After the wedding, the only family I had left in Chang'an, my fifth brother, the one who spoiled me most, was leaving too. He was returning to Human Pass, back to my eldest brother and the others. In an instant, this enormous city felt empty. There was only me. The more I thought about it, the sadder I became. I hugged my knees tight and sobbed, tears pattering down. Suddenly, a pebble struck the ground in front of me with a sharp tap. I looked up to see a child standing there. His hands were clasped behind his back, his expression arrogant, as if he were looking down on me. In an adult's tone, he said, "So you're the new secondary consort my father married?" I wiped my tears and lifted my head. "Yes." "Do you know my father already has my mother?" He leaned in, trying to get a better look at me. I turned my face aside and muttered, "I know." "Then do you know my father and my mother love each other so much that no one can squeeze in?" He leaned even closer. "I'm not trying to." I felt wronged. All I wanted was to go home with my fifth brother. "Then why are you crying?" He stared curiously at my bridal crown and reached out to touch its winged ornament. His eyes were black and bright, shimmering as he looked at me. I didn't dodge. I let him touch it. "I miss home. It's your first marriage." He toyed with my crown, so absorbed he didn't even realize what he was saying. I glared at him, furious, so flustered I couldn't form words. Insulting me. Only when he saw how angry I was did he realize what he'd said. He hurriedly apologized. Sorry, I spoke without thinking. Don't tell my father." I stood up in a huff. "You? Go away." I turned to head back inside. He grabbed my sleeve in a panic. Hey, don't be mad. I really didn't mean it. Kids say dumb things." I glared at him with what I thought was my fiercest look. "A brat with your hair in knots." He wasn't scared at all. Instead, he looked astonished. "So you can speak in 4-character phrases. I thought you could only say 3 words at a time." I shook off his hand and refused to look at him. "You're ridiculous. Where's your home?" "My home is the Eastern Palace. I've never seen anything beyond the palace walls." "Is your home far? Next time you go back, can you take me with you?" "Hey, do you have horses? I want to ride, but I can't start learning riding and archery until next year." "Can you ride? I think riding is so impressive, but you probably can't." He shook his head at my tear-streaked face. "You cry so much, you definitely can't ride." Riding, shooting, going to war, that's the best life." "I can ride," I muttered, offended at being looked down on. "What did you say?" He seemed not to hear me clearly. "War isn't fun." I didn't repeat myself. My brothers had said girls in Chang'an weren't allowed to ride horses, so I couldn't ride anymore. If I did, people would laugh. I didn't understand it. Chang'an's streets were wide, and plenty of men rode through them. Why couldn't I? Even if I could ride, why shouldn't I? Luckily, he didn't press me. He simply tugged me back down to sit and asked, "Hey, what's your name?" "My name is Lucas Lee." I steadied myself and said, clearly and slowly, "Charlotte Pai." On my first night in the Eastern Palace, I sat under the eaves with Lucas Lee. His endless chatter and questions thinned the loneliness of that night. The Crown Princess truly was kind. When I went to pay my respects, she kept me for breakfast and even asked about my tastes. Holding my hand, she said gently, "From now on, the Eastern Palace is your home. The Crown Prince, Luke, and I are your family." The Crown Prince and the Crown Princess were deeply in love. After more than a decade of marriage, their feelings hadn't faded. The Eastern Palace had only the Crown Princess as its rightful mistress. If the Emperor hadn't insisted on this marriage, they would have been such a rare pair. I felt guilty. I couldn't bear to ruin what they had. So I only nodded obediently. The Crown Princess treated me well. She had new clothes made for me, gave me beautiful jewelry, and even combed my hair herself. She cared for me in every detail. She said she was often alone in the Eastern Palace, with no one to truly talk to. She said she and the Crown Prince had always wanted a sweet, considerate daughter, but fate had never granted them one. I understood what she meant. She and the Crown Prince meant to raise me like a daughter, so I redefined my place in my heart. I was an adopted daughter, not a consort. No one wants to share her husband, not even the Crown Princess. Life in the Eastern Palace was unbearably dull. Sometimes the Crown Princess taught me calligraphy, painting, and needlework. Sometimes she took me boating on the lake, or to hear opera. I was happy enough, but she couldn't always keep me company. She still had to attend to the Crown Prince. So I was usually with Lucas Lee instead. He was terribly mischievous. Once, someone presented the Crown Prince with a peacock. Luke wanted to pluck its feathers to make a fan for the Crown Princess, and I helped him catch it. We rolled in the mud until we were filthy, hair in disarray. When we presented the peacock feather fan, the Crown Prince and the Crown Princess took one look at us and burst out laughing. The Eastern Palace felt warm and bright. Later, that fan became the Crown Princess's favorite gift. Slowly, I discovered that the more mischievous I was, the more I ignored propriety, the happier the Crown Prince and Crown Princess became. The more they liked me, the kinder their eyes were. The more they indulged me. So I liked causing trouble with Luke more and more. They spoiled me, and I spoiled Luke. They treated me like a daughter, so I treated Luke like a son. When he skipped lessons, I covered for him. When he was punished, I pleaded for him. When he climbed trees to catch cicadas, I stood watch. Luke was good to me too. He brought me snacks I liked. He copied the Crown Prince's assigned work for me. When I slept, he fanned away mosquitoes until his own face swelled with bites. When the crown princess saw his puffy face, she made each of us a sachet to repel insects. Those days in the Eastern Palace were the happiest I'd had in all my years in Chang'an. At that moment, Luke was perched on my wall, whispering my name and trying hard to get my attention. "Luke!" I hurried over, lifting my skirt. "Get down, it's dangerous." "Quick, Lottie, help me, I can't get down." I rushed outside and rose on tiptoe to lift him down, but my foot slipped. We both tumbled to the ground. I broke his fall with my body. Luke scrambled off me at once and checked whether I was hurt. I was rubbing my aching wrist when I looked up and saw the crown prince standing over me, his face dark. Luke and I hurriedly knelt. The crown prince held a ruler, stern-faced. "Hold out your hand." We both obediently held out our hands. The crown prince raised the ruler. Seeing me sneak a glance, he snapped, "Not you." I recoiled and quickly curled my hand into a fist, drawing it back. Crack! The ruler struck Luke's palm. He bared his teeth in pain and his hand reddened instantly. Crack! The second strike brought tears to his eyes. Crack! The third strike came down and I thrust my palm over his, taking the blow for him. My hand burned. "Lottie, you?" The crown prince choked with anger, then shook his head and sighed. "You and the crown princess will spoil him sooner or later." And he stormed off. Luke and I exchanged a grin, and in an instant we were laughing again, carefree as ever. Luke pulled me up. "Lottie, come on. I'll take you somewhere." "You can't call me Lottie." "But you call me Luke. I'm the elder," I said, putting on a solemn face. "Then I'll call you sister. I've always wanted a sister." I still shook my head. "You can't call me that either." "Why?" Luke looked genuinely puzzled. I did look like I could be his sister. I thought for a moment. "If you count it up," I hesitated, uncertain, then continued. "I should be your stepmother." "Oh, who cares about that? Come on. I'll take you to a great place. You'll definitely like it." Luke grabbed my hand and ran. A light breeze brushed my face and lifted my hair, and it made me think of the wind beyond Yumen Pass. The wind out there was nothing like the gentle breezes of Chang'an. It was fierce enough to whip up sand by the yard, fierce enough to knock a person from the saddle. I used to gallop beyond Yumen Pass. The wild wind would drive fine sand into my face. Even with a veil and a hat, I could feel the grit scouring my skin, the sting of it. I hadn't ridden a horse in a long time. Luke led me to the lake in the Eastern Palace. In the center stood a massive artificial hill with a pavilion on top. He untied a small boat from the shore, helped me aboard, and took up the oar with practiced ease, rowing toward the middle. He moored the boat and pulled me onto the rocks, but we didn't go up to the pavilion. Instead, he tugged me beneath it into a hidden corner where he found a small cave. The entrance was narrow. I could just squeeze through. A grown man like the crown prince would have to turn sideways and stoop to get in. But once inside, it opened up, far wider than the entrance suggested, big enough for 4 or 5 people. Bundles of herbs, tied with fine hemp string, hung all over the rock walls. In small hollows in the stone sat all kinds of knickknacks, clay figurines, wooden dolls, small daggers. In the middle was a flat slab like a table, stacked with a few medical texts, travel journals, and a chessboard. I stared, mouth open. No one would guess that inside the vast Eastern Palace, such a secret little world existed. Luke boasted proudly. "Well, not bad, right?" He pulled me down to sit, then began rummaging among the hanging herbs. He untied a small bundle and ground it in a mortar and pestle he produced from who knew where. When it was mashed, he spread the crushed herbs and green juice over the hand that had taken the blow for him. It was cool and soothing. He held my hand and blew on it. "Lottie, does it still hurt?" I shook my head. "It stopped ages ago." "This is my secret base. Everything I like most is here. Father watches me closely. He won't let me do this. Won't let me do that. When I'm happy or unhappy, I come here. I don't have friends in the Eastern Palace. Now I have you. You're my only friend. You can't betray me, okay? From now on, this is our territory. You have to keep it secret. Okay?" I nodded obediently. "And in a few days it'll be my birthday. After that, I can go to the training grounds to learn riding and archery. You have to come watch. I'll learn faster and better than everyone else." "You want to study medicine?" I couldn't help asking. "Is that bad?" Luke shot back. "My teacher says doctors save lives, and that deserves respect. He even told us that when we meet an older physician, we should bow. But father doesn't like me reading medical books. He only wants me to study statecraft, the 4 books. He says medicine is useless for me. He calls it a crooked path, not serious work. He says no royal son needs to learn medicine. If I were born a commoner, I could probably study it. Learn real skills, roam the world, be a wandering doctor and a wandering knight. Help the weak, save the dying. Luke said it with a foolish, dreamy grin. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt the crown prince was right, yet medicine truly was something good. My 4th brother had told me doctors have kind hearts, but Luke, born into royalty, wasn't allowed to learn it, just as I, in Chang'an, wasn't allowed to ride a horse. A sudden kinship rose between us. I wanted to ask why he wanted to study medicine, but I didn't, because I knew why I wanted to ride. I thought the yearning in my chest must be the same as his, and the longing I felt to return to human past must be the same as his wish to roam the world. Later, I learned that feeling had a name: wanting what you cannot have. There was joyous news in the Eastern Palace. The crown princess was pregnant. Everyone was delighted. Smiles were everywhere. I was delighted too. It was the first thing worth celebrating since I entered the Eastern Palace. What pleased me even more was that the crown princess didn't neglect me because of her pregnancy. She treated me as well as ever. I hugged her arm and rested my head on her shoulder. Empress. I caught myself and said more simply, "Can I hold the baby when it's born?" The crown princess's eyes curved with her smile. "Of course, then you must be good to the baby." I nodded solemnly. "I'll be even better than I am with Luke." She touched my head gently, smiling. Silly girl. Days passed. The crown princess's belly grew. Everyone in the Eastern Palace waited for the new life. Every day, I had to press my ear to her belly and listen for the little one before I would leave. The weather grew colder. Snow fell again and again. The entire Eastern Palace seemed wrapped in a thick cloud with no warmth in it. People stopped going out. Indoors, charcoal braziers glowed, and everyone grew lazy and drowsy. The moment you stepped outside, white breath rose from your mouth. Walk a little farther through wind and snow, and the cold seeped into your bones. When I went to see the crown princess, I refused to go inside. I was afraid I'd bring in chill and harm her. I would only stand outside, ask after her in a few words, and leave. Each time she scolded me in anger, and then, in pity, had someone send me things to keep warm. No, I'm not going in. I waved Aunt Serena off. "Aunt Serena, you should go take care of the crown princess." I took the warming flask the crown princess had sent and urged her back inside. Then I turned and walked back the way I came, step by step through wind and snow. Pop. A snowball struck my forehead, leaving my face instantly icy. I brushed away the bits of snow and, sure enough, saw Luke ahead, doubled over with laughter. I pretended to turn away, then bent quickly to scoop up snow and pack it into a ball. When Luke leaned in, I hurled it at him with lightning speed. It hit him square on the forehead. Now I was the one doubled over laughing. Once it began, we launched into a merry snowball fight, pelting each other until we were dusted white. When we grew tired, we lay side by side on the snow, gasping. Our breath turned to mist and vanished the moment it rose. I stared at the red walls and vermilion tiles powdered with snow, at the gloomy sky spilling flakes, and said, "Luke, you'll have a little brother or sister soon. Are you happy?" "Of course," Luke answered excitedly. "When the baby grows up, I'll have snowball fights with them, ride horses, climb mountains, shoot arrows, fly kites." "What if it's a girl?" I asked. Luke thought. "Then I'll make her lots and lots of pretty clothes, give her the biggest pearls from the Eastern Sea, the best jewelry, and send her the finest, prettiest things in the world." I still wasn't satisfied. I pressed on. What if she doesn't like those things? What if she likes riding, archery, and snowball fights? "Then she can ride, shoot, and have snowball fights," he declared. "If I have a little sister, I'll make her the happiest girl in the world." His answer filled me with a free, unburdened joy, as if I were back at Yumen Pass. My brothers let me wear beautiful nomad clothes and the biggest pearls. I rode my little red horse, galloping across the Gobi and along the lake. I was the happiest girl in the world. I grew up exactly as Luke described. I lay in the snow and let the flakes fall on my body and face, drifting into my eyes, icy for an instant, then melting. I let out a long breath and grinned. Because of Luke, I suddenly started to like the Eastern Palace. Winter receded day by day. The year's end arrived. At last, at the start of the new year, the crown princess went into labor. We all waited outside. Through her cries, we waited nearly all night. Before dawn, we finally heard a baby's wail. Aunt Serena came out to announce the good news. It was a girl. Everyone cheered and surged forward, crowding around the crown prince to ask for rewards. Laughing, he called out, "Reward them," 3 times. Overjoyed and forgetting propriety, he swept Luke up in his arms and spun in circles in the courtyard. I pushed through the crowd and rushed inside. I took off my fox fur cloak crusted with frost, stood by the brazier for a long while until warmth seeped into me, then went to the inner room to see the crown princess and the newborn. The crown princess lay weakly on the bed, hair in disarray, looking utterly spent. Fine sweat beaded on her brow. When she saw me, she managed a thin smile and scolded in a breath, "You girl, you still remember to come see me?" I lunged to the bedside and gently threw myself into her arms, tears spilling. I was terrified. She patted my back softly and soothed me, her voice tender. Lottie, I'm fine. I have a long life ahead. Come, hold her." The crown princess gestured gently toward the cradle. I looked at her uncertainly. She smiled and nodded. I happily and carefully lifted the baby from the cradle. The child lay swaddled, eyes closed, cheeks pink and tender. The crown princess looked at her with a love so deep it seemed to overflow. I held the tiny baby, so nervous my palms sweated. At last I found my voice. "Am I the first one to hold her?" The crown princess smiled and nodded. I was so happy I nearly cried out. I had been the youngest in my family. I never had the chance, like my brothers, to watch younger siblings being born and growing up. As the youngest, I was always teased with stories of my childish embarrassments. Now, at last, I could witness a new life unfold. When she grew up, I could tell her I was the first person in the world to hold her, that she grew up in my arms. When I looked at her, it was like looking at myself. But I never got to see her grow up. She stayed in this world only 3 days before she left it. When Luke clamored to hold her, he discovered she was already cold, quiet and still. Luke stood rigid by the small bed, his face pale, his voice trembling. Little sister, she won't cry anymore." The crown prince rushed over in panic and shoved Luke aside. Luke fell to the ground in a daze, his head slamming hard against the incense burner behind him. When the crown prince lifted the baby, she was already barely breathing, unable even to cry. I held Luke in one arm and pressed my hand to his head with the other. He was bleeding. I watched the crown prince lose his mind. That nobleman shouted for physicians like a madman. The crown princess screamed and tried to climb out of bed to see the daughter she had carried for 10 months and brought into the world with such pain. Aunt Serena held her down with all her strength. Everyone moved in frantic chaos. The physicians examined her and tried again and again, but they couldn't save that small life. She died quietly in the crown prince's arms. The crown princess fainted from grief. It was the 3rd child she had lost. I collapsed to the floor, holding Luke, crying silently. My body was already cold. The blood on my hands had already begun to congeal, as cold as the air in the eastern palace. A heavy sorrow blanketed the entire palace, and for a long time, it didn't lift. Winter passed quickly, and spring arrived in the blink of an eye. Yet the eastern palace seemed forever stuck in that bitter winter. The crown princess lay ill in bed and rarely smiled. The crown prince seemed even busier than before, and his temper grew worse. Luke was punished more and more often, and each time more harshly. He grew quieter, less lively. The light in his eyes seemed to dim day by day. I always felt winter lingered longest around Luke, and felt coldest there. When I arrived, Luke was already kneeling on the icy floor. The crown prince raised a whip and brought it down again and again on the boy's thin back. Blood seeped through his clothes in shocking streaks. Luke held his spine rigid, biting his lip and making no sound. But tears fell uncontrollably, one by one. My heart clenched at the sight. Forgetting all decorum, I lifted my skirt, ran over and dropped to my knees, pulling Luke into my arms, crying with pain for him. "Lottie, move aside. Let me beat this unfilial son to death." The crown prince was blinded by rage, like a lion gone mad. I truly thought he might kill Luke, so I clung to him and refused to let go. "Stop, crown prince, you'll beat him to death." I'm going to beat to death this good-for-nothing who wastes his life on toys and idle dreams." The Crown Prince's fury had nowhere to land. With the whip unable to strike, he paced in circles, seething. He refuses to learn what the Grand Tutor teaches. He insists on running to the Imperial Medical Office to study medicine. Grand Tutor Chi is my teacher. He was so angry he nearly fainted. If I don't beat Luke to death today, he'll never understand loyalty and duty, never understand respect for teachers. Is it wrong that I only want to learn medicine? Luke lifted his chin, refusing to admit fault. That stubbornness set the Crown Prince ablaze. And what will you do with medicine? The Imperial Medical Office has countless physicians, all from medical families. They've trained since childhood. Which of them isn't better than you? You won't study Confucius or Mencius. You won't study Guanzhong. You won't study Hanfei or Xunzi, Laozi or Zhuangzi. Which of them is worse than the ramblings of those wandering healers you read? One day, if this realm passes into your hands, do you intend to rule it with your half-baked medical skills? If I don't wake you up today, then if you become ruler tomorrow, you'll be a disaster for the people, and it will be my failure as a father and a lord. As he spoke, he tore Luke out of my arms. Crack! Crack! 2 more lashes fell. Still kneeling, I lunged forward and shielded Luke in my arms, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. Stop! Crown Prince, stop! Luke knows he was wrong. Please, stop! He knows he was wrong. I think he's still defiant. The Crown Prince raised the whip again. I threw myself at him and grabbed his wrist, the hand holding the whip. Through tears, I said, "Then beat me. If Luke dies under your lash, then the Crown Princess and I won't live either. The Eastern Palace has been lifeless for far too long." Those words pierced the Crown Prince. He let out a long, bitter sigh, flung the whip to the ground, and stalked away with a sharp sweep of his sleeve. I held Luke in my arms. Only when the Crown Prince had gone far did Luke finally break into loud sobs. Great tears poured from his eyes, each one like a blow to my heart. I took him back and applied medicine. His back was split and mangled, a blur of blood and flesh. As I treated him, I couldn't stop crying. The tears kept coming, as if I hurt even more than he did. Hearing me cry so hard, Luke seemed almost not to feel the pain. "Lottie, stop crying, I'm used to it. In a few days I'll be bouncing around again." I said nothing. I couldn't. I was crying too hard to speak, only continuing to dress his wounds. From the day I was born, people said I was a lone evil star reborn, that I would bring harm to my parents and siblings. That's why, after all these years, out of all my parents' children, only I survived. That's not your fault. Your sister died from a rash. I had rashes when I was little too, but I was fine, and she's the one who died. That's not your fault. I didn't know what else to say. I didn't know how to comfort him. I know Father doesn't like me. No matter what I do, he's never satisfied. But I only want to become good at medicine so Mother won't lose her children again. Is that wrong? Luke cried out in grievance, sobbing until he couldn't catch his breath. I didn't know what I could do, so I only held him. Little by little, he cried himself out and fell asleep with his head on my lap. As the weather warmed, the Crown Princess's chambers remained cold and shadowed. She refused incense. She refused braziers. She pretended winter hadn't ended. Her illness had long since passed, yet she still wouldn't leave her bed. I knew it was her heart that had fallen ill. She wouldn't see the Crown Prince. She wouldn't see Luke. Each day she only sat or lay there, staring emptily into space. In just a few months she had grown thin and hollow, with none of her former radiance. Luke waited outside, hoping to go in and pay his respects. I glanced at the Crown Princess on the bed and patted the back of her hand. She blinked out of her daze and looked at me in confusion. Softly, I said, "The Crown Prince's son Luke is here to see you." The Crown Princess listlessly shook her head, turned her back to me, and closed her eyes. I sighed and stepped out. Luke stood in the courtyard watching me with hope. I shook my head. The hope in his eyes went out at once. He turned and ran. I knew he was crying. "Luke!" I chased after him. He hadn't seen his mother in months. He came every day, but his mother, overwhelmed by grief, sinking deeper and deeper, never let him in. His parents' sorrow pressed down on him at every moment. For a boy barely in his teens, it was too cruel. He ran straight to the lake, untied the only boat he had left, one that had been hidden from him, and rowed toward the center with all his strength. "Luke," I shouted from the shore, but he didn't turn his head. I knew he was hurting because I was hurting too. The Eastern Palace had been grieving for far too long. We hadn't eaten at the same table in ages. Smiles were rare on every face, as if winter had never left. I couldn't let it go on like this. I plunged into the water. Luke panicked at once. He threw down the oar, clung to the edge of the boat, and searched frantically beneath the surface. "Lottie! Lottie!" I held my breath and swam around to the other side. While Luke was completely focused, I burst from the water and grabbed the side of the boat. He yelped and fell backward onto the bottom of the boat. When he saw me grinning at him, he finally laughed too, shaken but relieved. After all that, I fell ill. I came down with a fever and was stuck in bed. I sank into a heavy sleep. When I woke, I saw that the peach blossoms outside the window had opened overnight, bright in the spring breeze after a winter of bitter cold, as if reborn. Chapter 2. At daybreak, I rushed into the imperial garden. I found a pair of scissors, climbed into the branches, and cut the prettiest, brightest peach blossoms. Climbing trees was nothing to me. Back at Human Pass, I used to spend my days up in them. I knew peach blossoms were loveliest when they bloomed on the branch. But a tree can't walk. It can't, and it won't, come to the eyes of the one who longs to see it. So I cut a great armful of blossoms and brought them to Crown Princess Yuchi. I used all kinds of flowers I'd stolen from the imperial garden to dress her room until it felt like spring. I had every door and window thrown open, so she could see the deep blue sky and great banks of cloud, so she could hear the birds, so she could feel the soft spring wind. Back at Human Pass, Solon once told me that spring in Chang'an was different. Spring at Human Pass carried a bleak kind of hope. But spring in Chang'an could heal any hurt. I wanted to give her Chang'an's spring as a gift. Of course, pain didn't heal so easily. But when you look at fresh flowers every day, your heart still lifts, doesn't it? Even if it couldn't truly ease her grief, someone had to do something. After more than a month of fresh flowers, the shadow in Crown Princess Yuchi's heart finally began to loosen. Her smile returned. She didn't want my efforts to go to waste. Now she was at least willing to walk with me in the garden. I helped her into bright, elegant robes. Aunt Serena arranged her hair and face with her own hands. Then we walked slowly into the imperial garden. The sun was bright, the clouds high, the breeze clean, flowers vied in bloom, layer upon layer of color, too beautiful for words. I picked a peach blossom and pinned it at her temple. Her face and the flower made each other look all the more radiant. Crown Princess Yuchi held the hand hooked through her arm. She let out a long breath, as though she'd finally set down a burden that weighed 1,000 pounds. Then she smiled softly. "Lottie, thank you for everything you've done for me." I rested my head lightly on her shoulder. "Look, Princess, spring is here, everything will be better." The Eastern Palace seemed to wake from a nightmare all at once. Little by little, everyone found their spirit again. The Eastern Palace's old life returned, all because Crown Princess Yuchi did. The Crown Prince finally shook off his gloom and came back to the Eastern Palace. We ate at the same table again, laughing and talking as we used to. Everything felt different, and yet it felt the same. Luke still had to go to the training grounds to practice riding and archery. He begged me to come watch. I looked at Crown Princess Yuchi, and she looked at the Crown Prince. They exchanged a smile and nodded. With their permission, I grabbed Luke's hand and ran to the training grounds, thrilled. Luke changed into riding clothes and looked every bit a straight-backed young man. He practiced shooting on foot first. From 10 paces, 9 out of 10 arrows hit the bullseye. From 20 paces, he could barely manage 5 perfect rings, and 1 arrow went wide. From 30 paces, it was already hard to land a perfect ring. Still, for a child, it was impressive, so I walked up smiling and ruffled his hair. "That's very good." But he didn't look satisfied. He switched to another bow, swung onto his horse, and began mounted archery. I could feel his anger. At that point, it wasn't suitable to keep practicing. But before I could stop him, he'd already kicked his horse into a run across the training grounds. 3 arrows flew in a smooth sequence, yet all of them missed. He refused to accept it and urged the horse on, ready to shoot again. But the horse seemed to sense its rider's temper. It squealed and pawed the ground beneath him. I saw it at once. The horse was about to spook. A good horse is fierce. It threw a tantrum, screaming as it reared, trying to buck its rider. Luke cried out. His bow slipped from his hands. He hauled the reins tight to keep from being thrown. Everyone panicked and rushed in, which only made the horse more frantic. The horse bolted, out of control, and charged out of the training grounds. I had no choice. I rolled up my sleeves, grabbed a nearby horse, swung into the saddle, and spurred it after him. Go, go, I shouted, riding hard. I galloped flat out. The wind tore my hair loose and snapped my sleeves. But a fierce joy surged through me. It felt like breaking a shackle, like I was back in my childhood, back at Human Pass. I rode into the wind with my whip raised, like an arrow loosed from a bow, like a bird set free. Even breathing felt effortless. It was as if I'd flung Chang'an and the imperial city far behind me. Nothing could bind me anymore. I almost wanted to shout with delight, but I quickly caught up to the spooked horse. I controlled my mount, edged closer until we rode side by side, then seized the moment and scooped Luke into my arms. Luke stared at me, eyes wide. You can ride? I grinned, proud and not modest in the least. And I ride well. Seeing his disbelief, a swelling pride rose in my chest. A flock of birds swept across the sky. I took another bow from my saddle and handed the reins to Luke. Hold tight. The wind would steal my voice, so I had to shout. There are 13 birds up there. Which one do you want? Head or wing? I raised the bow. Luke's mouth fell open, and I was even more pleased with myself. I glanced at him, too stunned to speak, and curled my lips in satisfaction. I want the third feather on the left wing of the third bird from the left. Even my voice lifted at the end, smug with it. Luke, watch closely. I drew the bow to the full, loosed the arrow with a sharp hiss, and a short bird cry answered. From the distant sky, a blue-black feather drifted down. It was the first time I'd ever seen Luke so shocked he couldn't speak. From that day on, Luke never slept before midnight. In his courtyard, the hiss of arrows rang through the night. You couldn't blame him. Even Solon said I was born with a gift for archery. When I was Luke's age, there was no one in the army who could beat me with a bow. After returning to Chang'an, I'd set down my bow, but I'd never truly set it down in my heart. Solon once said, you can live among sheep, but never forget you are an eagle. So even though life in Chang'an softened the calluses on my hands, it could never fully smooth the calluses on my heart. Because Solon said, I would always be the fiercest spring wind at Human Pass. With my indirect supervision, and driven by his pride, Luke's riding and archery improved at a startling pace. Even the crown prince, rarely generous with praise, commended him. At dinner, the crown prince asked Luke what had made him so diligent. Luke pressed his lips together and said nothing. I watched him struggle and smiled. Luke had promised to keep my secret, just as I'd promised to keep his. Luke says he wants to hunt the biggest prey in the autumn hunt and present it to the princess and you, I said, smiling as I rescued him. Luke stared at me, eyes wide. He knew his own level, so he didn't feel grateful at all. I only blinked at him, pleased. Fine, I'll help you. Getting back on a horse again stirred something hungry inside me. I couldn't wait for my next chance to run free at a full gallop, and the autumn hunt was the best opportunity. Just this once, I wanted to be reckless. I kept the thought to myself. Because I'd rescued him at the table, Luke had no choice but to work even harder. The bowstring cut his hands until they were raw and bloody, and he could only grit his teeth and endure it. After I wrapped his hand in a silk cloth and tied it tight, I kept coaching him as he drew the bow, always at night, away from others, in secret. Shooting through a willow leaf at 100 paces wasn't something you learned in a day. If you wanted to hit every time, you had to draw the bow at least 1,000 times a day. Even with talent, you needed twice the practice. Only then could you carry yourself with confidence and hide your blade when it was time. The repetition was dull and punishing. Soon, Luke's arms were so tired he could barely lift them. He lowered the bow, frustrated. I handed him tea. His hands had no strength left. Even holding the cup made him tremble, so I took it and fed him myself. Lottie, how did you get so good with a bow? Luke sat on the ground, looking up at me with pleading eyes. I crouched beside him and handed him a silk cloth to wipe his sweat. I thought about his question and realized there really was no shortcut. Maybe talent. Luke wailed and flopped onto his back. How could you compete with talent? I leaned in and patted his head. Hard work makes up for lack of skill. It didn't comfort him. He rolled over and wailed even louder. Luke's courtyard had a huge parasol tree. To train him, I hung it full of candied fruit, and everything from his secret cave that could be hung from branches. When Luke saw what I'd done to the tree, he asked in confusion, "Lottie? What does this mean?" He already seemed to have a bad feeling. There was a note of pleading in his voice. "From today on, we're not shooting a target. You'll shoot the candied fruit hanging on this tree." Luke looked like he was about to collapse. "They're so small. How am I supposed to hit them?" "The bullseye isn't necessarily bigger," I said, unimpressed. Luke tried to argue. "That's not the same thing." It wasn't. A target is dead. If you practice 1,000 times a day, you could hit the center with your eyes closed. Candied fruit was small and hung on branches. The wind made it a living target. It felt far more satisfying than hitting a painted circle. But I didn't say that. If I did, Luke might never want to practice again. "Then shoot the string," I said, choosing what I thought was easier. "Isn't the string harder?" Luke looked like I was trying to drive him mad. "This tree is covered in things you love. Remember to avoid them," I said lightly. Missing was simpler than hitting. That was the easiest part of all. Luke wailed and finally just lay down, rolling on the ground like a spoiled child. "Of course I want to avoid them." "Ah, but the targets you hung are way bigger than the candied fruit. How am I supposed to avoid them?" Lucas Lee was truly on the verge of tears. I went over, crouched beside him, sighed, and said softly, "I used to hang candied fruit on pigeons' legs and shoot them." That was why I'd asked him so confidently that day. Head or wing? My legs ached from crouching, so I sat down on the ground. "Luke, my archery and riding aren't only because of talent. I worked twice as hard, too. Even without talent, the effort I put in would be enough to make me a master archer." Luke stopped his tantrum at once. He sat up straight, all mischief gone, eyes bright as he looked at me. "But after I returned to Chang'an, I never drew a bow or rode again. Still, the moment I drew a bow, I felt like I was back at Yumen Pass, like the bow had never left my hands, not because of talent, but because of belief. After thousands and thousands of shots, I'd already become one with the arrow. I trust the arrow in my hand the way I trust myself. I hit the mark because I believe I can." I had never said so much in one breath. When I finished, I watched Luke's reaction in secret. He stared at me, stunned, eyes full of admiration and respect. "Lottie," Luke said solemnly, "I understand." Then he picked up the bow and practiced again. This time his expression was firm. His movements were clean and sharp. Every release carried a calm certainty, unstoppable as a breaking wave. In an instant, it was as if he'd grown up. I didn't know when Crown Princess Yuchi had come up behind me. She stood there quietly. When I turned and saw her, she only smiled at me, gentle light in her eyes. I walked to her, happy. She handed me a covered bowl of soup, then touched my head with affection. She said nothing, only smiled and left. Soon it was time for the autumn hunt. Crown Princess Yuchi suggested we all go, and the Crown Prince readily agreed. The happiest, of course, were Luke and me. When Crown Princess Yuchi looked at me, her smile seemed to carry quiet permission. I threw myself into her arms, gratitude rising from the bottom of my heart. When the Emperor held the autumn hunt, the officials went with him. After the tents were set up and everything arranged, the hunt began. The Emperor was unwell, so this time, he only watched the ceremony. The ministers were the ones eager to compete. Only Luke was there under pressure. Word of his intense training had even reached the Emperor, so although Luke was not yet old enough, an exception was made, and he was allowed to participate. Luke sat straight on horseback and glanced at me with worry. I nodded. Only then did he spur his horse and ride off with the others. The women stayed together with the Emperor, seated on a high platform to watch. I sat quietly beside Crown Princess Yuchi, forcing down my excitement. I held out for a quarter of an hour. Then I gently covered the back of her hand with mine and whispered, "Princess, I want to go back to the tent." Crown Princess Yuchi smiled and patted my hand. "Be careful." I nodded eagerly, hurried back to my tent, and changed into riding clothes. When the guards weren't paying attention, I slipped out. I led the horse I'd prepared long ago and dashed into the hunting enclosure. I'd promised Luke I would help him hunt the biggest prey to present to the crown prince and the princess. Luke was waiting for me anxiously not far away. He'd already caught a few rabbits, but rabbits didn't count as big prey. When he saw me riding in, his eyes lit up. "You're finally here. Go!" I didn't stop. I urged my horse forward and shouted, "Let's hunt deer." I meant it. Before long, Luke and I easily drove a muntjac into a corner and brought it down. After that, we split up. He continued hunting, and I returned to the tents. On the third day of the hunt, they found signs of a black bear in the forest. Everyone was eager, and traps were set near the woods. Arrows alone wouldn't be enough for a bear. While Luke led people to set the traps, I also prepared a crossbow and a spear. And to hunt in peace, Luke and I cheated a little. We had someone spread a false message that the bear was in the north. When everyone surged north in a great wave, Luke and I took a few of our own people and slipped quietly to the west. "Lottie," Luke called to me from horseback. "When you hunted bears before, did you ever face danger?" On horseback, everyone had to shout to be heard. "No," I shouted back, making sure the wind and hooves didn't swallow my voice. "I've never hunted a bear before," I added truthfully. Of course I hadn't. There were no bears at Human Pass. Realizing that only made me more excited. But when I finished and looked at Luke, his face had gone pale. He stared at me in disbelief. I didn't understand at first, then it hit me. He'd seen my confidence and assumed I had experience. He hadn't expected I was just fearless and overconfident. "Luke, don't worry." He looked so horrified that I felt a little guilty. I could only comfort him. "I'll protect you." I tried to build his confidence. It didn't seem to help. He swallowed hard. He had no choice but to trust me. I only smiled wider, drinking in the joy of riding at full speed. We searched for a long time. At last, near the edge of the forest, we found a black bear. Luke and the attendants drew their bows recklessly. Before I could even get the word "don't" out, several arrows had already hissed away, only to miss. Their bows weren't strong enough. Arrows shot like that might pierce the bear's fur and skin, but they wouldn't reach anything vital. The bear was enraged. With a roar, it charged. Everyone scattered on horseback. The bear bellowed again. Several horses that had never seen battle screamed and reared. The worst riders were the first to fall. I drew and released 3 arrows at once, aimed at the bear's throat. The bear was quick. It dodged the vital spot, sprang, and roared as it lunged straight at me. I yanked my horse around and dodged, cleanly, dangerously. "Lead it to the traps," I shouted, spurring my horse toward the trap line. The others moved to block the bear, forcing it in one direction. The bear, furious, slammed its paws into the ground. Grass and leaves leapt, birds burst into the air. I looked back and saw it coming at me. Jaws gaping, claws raised. There was no time to draw my bow. I lifted the crossbow and fired at its eye. The bolt struck its eye, and it became even more violent. It roared and swiped at me with a massive paw. I protected my head first and took the blow across my back. The impact nearly shattered my shoulder. I couldn't hold on. I tumbled off the horse, and as I rolled, I tore the spear from my saddle. I held the spear in my right hand and the crossbow in my left. The bear bared its teeth and crept closer, savage and testing. The trap was not far behind me. Luke drew with all his strength and released 3 arrows in a row, striking the bear's back. The bear spun at once and lunged at him. Luke rode, drawing it toward the trap. An enraged bear ran nearly as fast as a horse. Luke's horse was struck down. He was flung several yards away. His bow fell not far from him. Grimacing in pain, Luke pushed himself up. I saw the bear on my side begin to rear. The trap was behind it. "Now, Luke, catch!" I hurled the spear to him. Only when the bear reared did it expose the vulnerable spot on its chest. Luke caught the spear without hesitation. He gripped it, leapt, and with every ounce of strength in his body, roared and drove it toward the bear's heart. The spear sank in. Howling, it toppled backward into the trap. With a thunderous crash, the bear fell in. Everyone shouted and cheered in disbelief, giddy with survival. Luke stood at the edge of the pit, his whole body slack with relief. He was still panting. Blood at the corner of his mouth hadn't dried yet. He grinned at me. Silly, proud. I knew that from this moment on, he would never deny himself for anyone else. My Luke would truly become a young man. And I was satisfied. Once it was done, I slipped away. The crowd would soon rush over. Everyone would know the tale. Lucas Lee, the emperor's grandson, 13 years old, hunted a black bear in the autumn hunt. The court historians would write it into the records. Before that happened, I returned to the tent, treated my wound as best I could, changed into clean clothes, and went to find Crown Princess Yuchi. The black bear became the largest prey in the hunting grounds. The emperor was delighted and praised Luke, truly my grandson. That night, bonfires were lit, the ministers feasted, and a victory banquet was held for Luke. When Crown Princess Yuchi heard, she stared at me in shock, eyes wide with disbelief. I smiled and hid in her embrace, sweetness filling my chest. "Princess, our Luke is amazing, isn't he?" That evening, the emperor asked Luke what he planned to do with the great beast he'd taken. The bear wasn't dead. Luke's strike hadn't been enough to kill it. It had been locked in a huge iron cage. It was covered in wounds and whimpered without pause. I suddenly remembered old hunts. I was often paired with Lun. Lun never cared for hunting, so he always came back empty-handed. He said all things had spirit and you should keep mercy in your heart. He was also the only one of my brothers who held no important post in the army. He was the most capable of them all. He taught me everything about riding and archery, yet quietly chose to be a military doctor. I once asked Beck why. Beck only said, "A healer's heart is benevolence." Unease stirred in me, but I said nothing. Crown Princess Yuchi quietly tightened her grip on my hand. The Crown Prince looked over, puzzled. Crown Princess Yuchi and I exchanged a smile and stayed silent. Luke stood on the platform and cupped his fists in salute. "Grandfather Emperor, I wish to present the black bear I hunted to my father and mother." He straightened slightly, looked at me with smiling eyes full of gratitude, and added, "And to consort Charlotte Pay." "Oh?" The emperor said nothing else, only asked, "Then what do the Crown Prince and Crown Princess Yuchi plan to do with this blind bear?" The Crown Prince glanced at Crown Princess Yuchi, seeking her view. She rose with a smile and gave a light salute. "Father Emperor, last night I had a strange encounter in a dream. I dreamed of a black bear that spoke with a human voice and begged me for mercy. I never expected that today Luke would truly hunt a black bear. A gentleman, seeing a creature alive, cannot bear to see it die. Hearing its cries, he cannot bear to eat its flesh. Because of this dream, I feel perhaps this bear's fate is not meant to end, so I think it would be better to release it. It would be a good deed." The emperor laughed loudly. "Good, good, good," he said, "good 3 times in a row. A flying bear entering a dream, an excellent omen. Then we'll do as Crown Princess Yuchi says." The emperor was pleased. The ministers were at ease. Everyone praised his wisdom and shouted long life. When we returned from the hunting grounds to Chang'an, it was just in time for my birthday. That day, I received a letter from Yuman Pass. I held it and smiled so brightly I could almost see my brothers crammed together, all talking over one another. Seeing how happy I was, Crown Princess Yuchi asked curiously, "Lottie, what has made you so happy?" "It's a letter from my brothers. Solon says I've become an aunt. My sister-in-law gave birth to a baby boy." I leaned in and opened the letter like I was showing off treasure. The first line says, "I hope this letter finds you well. Congratulations on gaining a nephew." He's the one who became a father, but his first line is to congratulate me. He's afraid I won't send a gift. Crown Princess Yuchi asked, puzzled. "If I remember correctly, aside from your second and fifth brothers, the others are all married. How do you know it was your eldest brother who had a son?" "You don't know," I smiled. "My brothers are many, but they only write once every 3 months. Each of them has so much to say. One line turns into another, and they can write for hours. The first time I received their letter, it was as thick as a whole book. So later, they set a rule. In order, each person writes only 1 sentence, and only the important parts." I didn't like talking much, but my brothers were all chatterboxes. They said that since I lived in the Eastern Palace, they couldn't send too many letters too often. They were afraid of stirring gossip and causing me trouble. "Lottie, today is your birthday," Crown Princess Yuchi asked gently, watching my cheerful face. "Do you have a wish?" "I hope everyone stays healthy and lives to 100. She shook her head. "I mean a wish for yourself." "Go back to Yuman Pass," I blurted without thinking. Crown Princess Yuchi froze for a moment. Then her smile returned, soft and gentle. She patted my head and nodded. "Lottie's wish will come true. I didn't understand what she meant. I only thought, will it really? Just then, the crown prince walked in. He saw me and said, "Good, Lottie, you're here. It's your birthday today. This is a gift I prepared for you." He handed me a box. I opened it. Inside was a set of the 4 treasures of the study. If I remembered correctly, it was the same thing he'd given Luke last year for his birthday. Still, I was delighted. Perfect. I'll write back to my brothers. I returned to my courtyard, folded the family letter, and put it back in the box with my other letters. I ground ink and spread out paper. Just as I wrote the first line, Luke climbed over the wall from outside. By now, he had it down. He didn't fall anymore. He walked to the desk, looked at the line I'd written, and asked, confused, "Why does the first line say, Sun, Moon, Mountain, River, Nile begin? Sun, Moon, Mountain, River, Nile are my brothers' names. It's more convenient to write it this way." I scratched my head, embarrassed. We were used to having no rules between siblings, so our letters were casual too. Sun, Moon, Mountain, River, Nile, Lottie. Sun, Moon, Mountain, River, Nile, Wind, Cloud, Rain. The fortune teller said father was meant to have 8 children. I lowered my eyes, thinking of something sad. My eldest to 5th brothers are named Solon, Lun, Everest, Beck, and Nile. Sun, Moon, Mountain, River, Nile, Wind, Cloud, Rain. Lottie, your family really knows how to name people, Luke said, clicking his tongue in genuine amazement. Our names were all chosen by Mother. I kept writing as I asked, "It's late, Luke. What is it?" "Huh." Luke's eyes flickered, and his expression turned awkward. "Nothing, Lottie, get some rest. I'm going." He turned and ran. But he left something on my desk. It was a strange hairpin. At the end were fuzzy ears made from a rabbit tail. 2 red gems were set where the eyes should be, making it look like a little rabbit. Odd, but cute. 2 months after we returned from the hunting grounds, Crown Princess Yuchi's dream came true. The imperial physician said she was already 2 months pregnant. The crown prince and I were so happy we could have jumped. Because of that dream, the emperor was especially pleased too. He bestowed many gifts. Only Luke looked worried, quiet and tense. I knew what he feared. In truth, everyone feared it. We simply understood one another well enough not to say it aloud. This pregnancy made Crown Princess Yuchi terribly ill. She vomited badly, could barely eat, and rarely left her bed. I went to the crown prince and asked for a few Buddhist texts to copy, to pray for her. The crown prince looked at me and sighed. He hesitated. "Lottie, are you happy here in the Eastern Palace?" I held the sutras, confused. "I'm happy. The crown prince sighed again. "Forget it. Go on." I nodded blankly and went to copy sutras. Crown Princess Yuchi suffered through the pregnancy. She barely left her bed. The crown prince often scolded the unborn little one behind her back, calling it unfilial. The following year at the Dragon Boat Festival, Crown Princess Yuchi gave birth safely. Mother and son were well. The emperor personally bestowed the name Oliver Lee, courtesy name Zia. Because of the bear dream, the emperor placed great hopes on the child. He even said that once the boy was old enough to study, he would be brought into the palace and taught personally. At the same time, I received a strange letter from Yumin Pass. Solon said he was worried that my life in the Eastern Palace was not as good as my letters claimed. He said he would return to Chang'an to see for himself. He told me to find a way to leave the palace on the 15th day of the 6th month and meet him at Lingjue Temple. Solon could be rash, but he was the commander at Yumin Pass. Without an imperial order, he could not return to the capital. He would never abandon his post on his own. So I decided to write back first and ask what was really going on. Yet I never received Solon's reply. To learn the truth, I still decided to go to Lingjue Temple and see for myself. I went to Crown Princess Yuchi and told her I wished to go outside the city to Lingjue Temple to pray for the little imperial grandson's blessing. She didn't stop me. So on the 15th day of the 6th month, I traveled light and quietly left the Eastern Palace. Lingjue Temple was remote. After leaving the city, it was about 20 li, and part of the route ran through mountain roads. Not long after we entered the mountains, we were attacked. There were many of them, and too few of us. I had no bow with me. My shoulder, injured from the bear, still hadn't fully healed. At that moment, even a master archer was nothing more than a weak woman with bare hands. They knocked me unconscious and carried me away. When I woke again, I didn't know where I was. My hands and feet were bound. My eyes were covered and my mouth gagged. I didn't know how long I'd been out. I didn't know whether it was day or night. They rarely spoke in front of me. When they did, they kept their voices low, whispering. I struggled to sit up, trying to draw their attention and gather more information. No one reacted. The only thing I was sure of was this: they didn't plan to kill me. Instead, they seemed to be taking me somewhere. They had carts and horses. By the sounds, there were at least 20 of them, and they were traveling on the main road. I could hear many wagons and riders passing by. For more than 20 people to move openly along an official road without drawing attention, the best way was to disguise themselves as a merchant caravan. Who were they? Where were they taking me? What did they want? Had something happened to Solon? I didn't know how long it was before they stopped to rest. They brought me down from the carriage and untied me. I finally had the chance to open my eyes, only to find it was night, and we were in the wilderness. Darkness had fallen like a huge sack over everything. Even with a fire, there was only a thin seam of light, like a slit at the mouth of that sack. It was hardly better than being blindfolded. The leader knelt before me and saluted in military fashion. "I am Nathan Joe," he said. "I have been ordered by General Pei to escort you back home." As he spoke, I watched the others around us. They were cautious. Even while resting, they posted lookouts. Only one man sat by the fire with ease. Everyone treated him with respect. He seemed to be the true leader. Yet he was dressed plainly, as though deliberately trying not to stand out. Everest once taught me, when something is abnormal, there is always a reason. "Solon sent you to get me?" "Yes." "Why?" Solon had not said. Nathan Zhao drew a breath. "The general has been framed. He has been accused of plotting rebellion. Soon he will be escorted to the capital under guard. He fears you will be implicated in Chang'an, so he sent me to bring you home and settle you safely." He didn't say that in his letter. If Solon was to be escorted to the capital, and he wanted me protected, why not send Lun, who held no army post? Why send a deputy I'd never even met? Nathan Zhao pulled a military order and a token from his clothing and handed them to me. "I wrote the letter on his behalf," he said. "I did not dare put such things in writing, in case the letter fell into the wrong hands and harmed the general. But you should recognize the general's private seal." The letter I'd received truly wasn't in Solon's handwriting, yet it bore his private seal. That was why it had seemed so strange. I opened the order. It carried Solon's official stamp as well. "Get up," I said. He rose. I continued, "If you're Solon's deputy, why have I never seen you before?" I was transferred to serve at the general's side only in the past 2 years. By then, you were already consort Charlotte Pei in the Eastern Palace, so you never met me. But I have seen you. Once, you accompanied the general on an inspection. You drew your bow and shot down a bar-headed goose. I was the one who went to retrieve it. I had indeed inspected with Solon. I had indeed shot a bar-headed goose. This man did seem to be Solon's subordinate. But I didn't speak. I only watched the men around us in silence. They were patrolling, but not in pairs. They were scattered, furtive, and aside from Nathan Zhou, they were all foreigners. Seeing my doubt, Nathan Zhou explained, "They're a hired foreign merchant caravan. We'll need their cover on the road from Chang'an back to Yumen Pass. And that man," he pointed to the one by the fire. "He is their leader." At his words, the man finally turned his head. He gave me a small smile and nodded in greeting. I stayed wary. As casually as I could, I slipped the order and token into my clothes. Then I asked, "What about my other brothers? Are they all right?" "Don't worry," Nathan Zhao said. "The other generals are confined to the residence for now. They're not in danger yet. Once you return, you'll see them." I nodded. He seemed to have no obvious flaws. I fell silent for a moment, then asked, as if I'd just remembered, "How is Lun's leg injury?" Nathan Zhou laughed. "You remembered wrong. Dr. Pei has no leg injury." I nodded and murmured, "I did remember wrong. Lun doesn't have a leg injury. The one with the leg injury is Everest." Nathan Zhou relaxed. "Once you're back at Yumen Pass, you can ask the general yourself."